We're going to jump into, we're going to continue the chapter on Chokhmah. Um, and so uh, just a very micro review. Remember that, so we're studying the book Sharei Ora, by the 13th century Kabbalist Yosef Chikatilia, in which his purpose in writing this book is to articulate all of the names of God that are used in the Torah. Please put yourself on mute if you can. I'm hearing an echo. And all of the names of God that are used in the Torah and in the prayers, and he is presenting those names in light of Kabbalah. And along the way, though, he really is explaining foundational concepts of the Kabbalah. So it purports to be a book of the names of God, which it is, but it is also, it's not just like a list of those names, obviously. He's explaining the relationship of the Sephiroth through the book. And so so the one of the challenges of learning this with me is that I keep using the conventional names, the more well-known names of the Sefirot, like Chochmah, Bina, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, etc., which he does indeed use. But for example, the primary name of the Sefirah we are studying now, that he uses is Yah. So let me just do this. It is that name, Yah, and in the but this correlates to the Sefirah that is more well known as Chokhmah, and he does indeed call it Chokhmah also, but its primary name is Yah, because again he's doing this as a name for he's looking at the names of God and how they relate to the Sefirot. So Yud Hey is the name Yah, and that relates to Chokhmah. Now, remember that we talked about he has this heavy duty teaching, which is that remember he says that. So first of all, he, along with all Kabbalists, say that all of the Sefirot, and therefore the entire created universe, is expressed in the four-letter name of God, Yud Hey Vav Hey. So if you remember, and I'm reiterating this because it's going to become important for one of the lessons that we might get to today, that the tip of the Yud, the very tip of the Yud, here is the sphere of Keter. The body of the Yud is Chokhmah. The first Hey represents the sphere of Bina. Okay, so we have the first three Sefirot just contained in the first two letters. So in the name Yah, you have a reference to the first three Sefirot. The Vav represents the six Sefirot that come after that is Tiferet and those that surround Tiferet. And then the Hey, the second Hey represents Malchut. So, and we just as an aside, as a way to remember this, or not more than remember, but as a way to add some depth to it, the first Hey is, if you can imagine the letter Hey as like an open hand, which is, it's not a no-brainer that it looks like a hand, but if you can sort of see in the shape of the hand, tried to do this last time, a letter Hey, then you can imagine Bina as like an open hand, like offering something, the letter Vav as an arm, and then the letter Hey as a hand holding out to receive. So you have the wisdom, the supernal energy, the heavenly energy that God brings into the universe being handed down to created beings below. Now, what's the main, I guess I would say the main point of the lesson last time was that Yud Hey can stand on its own as a name of God, right? We sometimes refer to God as Yah, but nowhere in the Torah is God referred to as Vav Hey. That's not a name for God. And so what he's saying is the when the created beings, which for the purposes of this teaching are embodied in Vav and He, when the created world breaks itself off from God, it's as though you don't have you have no connection to God. You have no name for God. You have no relationship to God, and therefore no name for it. But Yah always stands unperturbed. Yah is always there. No matter what happens, Yah is a name of God, because the emanating divine energy of God radiating into the world is constant and cannot be undone. It can't, there's nothing that can ever stop it. It's just constantly creating the world and breathing life into it. So the only question is whether the created world can turn to it, so to speak, and acknowledge its radiating energy and create a life of holiness out of that. So that's kind of what we covered last time. One second, I'm just arranging this so I can see everybody, see all your beautiful faces. Okay, so that's like the little micro review. Now, again, let me just say this before we delve in, Foida, because I like people to, it's so easy to get lost in the Kabbalistic terminology. So when we talk about divine light, what do we mean when we talk about divine light, right? This phrase that all of us have thrown around. You've heard it. Every, every Kabbalist wandering through the streets trying to sell their wares, everyone talks about the light of God. So what does this mean? The light of God. Whoa, I'm hearing my own echo. If you can if you can mute yourself, it would be great. The light of God refers to a created being, that is you and me. Created beings, people can refer to the light of God when they are encountering God's action in the universe. That's what we mean when we say the light of God. When there's a discernible, through our learning, through our consciousness, through our prayer, through our meditation, when we encounter and are aware that we're encountering divine action, a divine quality, a divine property, a divine interaction with creation, we refer to that as light. Okay, but obviously it's just a metaphor, it's just a symbol, because it's not physical light. And I know that you know that, but it's really hard to know that. It's really, really hard in talking about Kabbalah to not confuse the signifier and the signified. It's really hard to, at least in my experience, I find it very hard to not hold on to these images that the Kabbalah is using, trying to explain these concepts. Okay, the light of God is not physical light, and it's just a tool for us to talk about this other reality, to put some language on it. Lenny, you look like you're about to have a question, but you're on mute.
Well, actually, I was just grimacing because the jack is slowly burning out of my computer, so it goes back and forth between. But I was going to say that, is it really just a metaphor, or is there an experience that you can have where Hashem appears, like in the burning bushes light? But I'll leave that open, because I don't think we're going to get an answer on that one today.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say there are prophetic visions that do include light, but there also are prophetic visions that don't include light, that are just as godly. But yeah, it's an interesting point. Okay, but you see this larger point I'm trying to make. Let me just belabor this for another moment, because this is such an important part of this chapter, to understand that the first two letters of the name, which again represent the top three Sephiroth, Keter, Chochmah, and Binah. Those, and hold on, I can bust out my Sephirotic tree again. 1 second. This is helpful. I can still have it on my desktop. 1 second. I don't know why I chose this one, but because well, I do actually know why I chose this one because it was the only one I could find on my desktop. Um, so can you all see this painting? Okay. So Keter is and this is obviously a modern oil painting rendering, or actually it might be watercolor, but that really doesn't matter. No, it must be oil. Anyway, but the structure of the spheroid is the same. By the way, what this lacks, the reason this looks different is you don't see the channels. There are usually lines connecting all the spheroid, which are important for other aspects that we're not talking about right now. But anyway, so this is Keter, this is Chokhmah, and this is Binah, generally. And again, these spheroid are not spheres. They're not objects that exist. This is a conceptual visualization for being able to talk about the relationship between the spheroid. Nowhere in space will you find these 10 circles relating, standing in the sky like this. This is just a product of the mind of the Kabbalists. Okay, so these three are one, like what's called the partsuf, and I don't want to belabor that word with you, but that means like a combination. So these three are often talked about as a group. Then these six are talked about as a group. Okay, and this is Tiferet right here in the middle, and Tiferet is surrounded by Gevura and Din. And I'm not being helpful because I'm not using the names he uses for these because I can't remember them at the moment. This is Netzach, and this is Hod, and this is Yesod. 1 second. Sorry. I'm trying to do a bunch of things at once here. Okay. Okay, so and then down here you have Malchut. And last time we talked about the fact that this artist was clever in a good way, because Malchut is almost entirely dark, but not quite. Malchut it's hard to discern God's presence within Malchut, but so there's a little bit of light there. It's mostly dark, and the pure Keter is overwhelmingly light. In fact, I would have made Keter pure white, but whatever. Okay, now what I want to say is that these generally, everything from this line, this imaginary line I'm drawing with my cursor below, basically refers to the operation of the created world. Okay? Tiferet and all of these lights surrounding it are all necessary for that's what really helps the created world like sustain itself, with all of the spiritual building blocks that God breathes into the world. These three in a way really stand above the created world, and that they can't be affected by it. Like, so we can screw up the world by ego, by anger, by destruction, by ignoring what's, never praying, never seeking to find any larger meaning. We can completely destroy, cut the world off. But these three will never be affected by that. We can throw these out of whack, so none of them are flowing into Malchut anymore. But these three are constantly in a pure form, just breathing pure possibility into the universe. Okay? So that is why, where did my, hold on. I am Zoom challenged. Okay, so that is why we can talk about, that's why he talks about Yah as being something that, will never be cut off. And will always stand as a name of God. So let me pause there and just ask you, that was all review, by the way. Can I clarify anything? And by the way, if you have a question and you weren't here last time, save the question for me for later, because I don't want to, I went through all this with everybody who's here last time. Michael Sasnow has his actual and his digital hand up.
Yes. So I'm just wondering, I'm not looking to get too arcane here or anything, but I've heard other people, like in a Chabad class I was once in, they were talking about the God's name, God's holy name, similarly to how you're talking about the light of God, as far as the things we can encounter. And so I'm just wondering, especially since you've got those 7 lower Sephiroth, which is where we experience that, I'm just wondering if you could make the analogy then that you've got like the light of God, and that it's then refracted into these 7 different names that kind of group the different manifestations that we can experience. Or if that even matters.
Yeah, well, everything matters. Those Chabad guys, those guys don't know what they're talking about. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Well, they didn't break it up like that.
I just
name of God manifestations, like the sun.
Yeah.
You can't experience the sun directly, but you experience the heat and the light.
Yes, I'll tell you the reason we have to be careful with that. So first of all, I would say any number of, like, I'm not a Kabbalistic purist, so I would say any symbol that accurately or image that accurately helps you understand the inner workings of the Sephiroth is fine by me. What we have to be careful about is to understand that even that all of these, the word refraction does make sense to me. Something else you just said didn't quite work for me, because they are all part of the same light. Like all of the Sephiroth, except Malchut's in a different category, they are all reflecting aspects of the same light. There's only one light. There's only the light of Ein Sof, of the infinite pure reality of God. And it's being obscured in different manners, but it's all the light we see is really part of that light. So the refraction metaphor does work for me, but we have to be careful not to talk about these as separate lights. So Lenny, is this what you were going to say? Some yeshiva bacher told me Lubavitcher Hasidim is the religion that most closely resembles Judaism. That's a great line. That's hilarious. I don't know if I buy it, but it's a great line. Okay, so now let's go onward. So this we were just starting to get into this when, oh, whoopsie, let me share the screen. We were just starting to get into this teaching when we ended the last class. So I'm going to circle back and start here. Okay, so and again, remember that I'm just taking little segments of the chapter. I'm not trying to present the chapter page by page. So we're jumping around a little bit. I'm just trying to find the parts that I think help us understand the essence of the Sephiroth. So this is from another section here. So in Exodus 17:16, and let's go there for a minute. Okay, so the Israelites come out of Egypt, and when they come out of Egypt, Amalek attacks them. And when Amalek attacks them, they're in this battle. And in the battle, what happens is, this is really significant. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. But whenever he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. Okay, which is, some kind of miracle, but that's what was happening. But Moses's hands grew heavy, so they took a stone and they put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur, one on each side, supported his hands. Thus his hands remained steady until the sunset. Okay, so through getting the help from the people around him, Moses was able to hold his arms up like this, and in so doing, Israel was able to prevail. And parenthetically, but not parenthetically, because I think this is what I'm about to say is sort of in the background of this teaching I'm about to share with you. As many of you have heard me say more than once, teach more than once, when it says, thus his hands remain steady, Vayihi yadav emunah. Moses' hands are, his arms are described as emunah, which you know that word to mean faith. Emunah is faith. But remember that faith in the Hebrew, faith and like faithful or steady are kind of indistinguishable. And so obviously when we say emunah, it can't mean faith in the sense that we use it when we talk about belief, right? It wouldn't make any sense to say his hands were belief. His hands were steady. They were being held emunah, okay, until the sun came. And so, and therefore Joshua, who's Moses is appointed as like an agent, as a general, Joshua overwhelmed the people of Amalek with the sword. And then God said to Moses, inscribe this in a document as a reminder and read it aloud to Joshua. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Okay. Moses built an altar and named it Adonai Nis'i. Vayomer ki yad al kesia. And he said it means, I wouldn't have translated it as it means. I would just say, and he said that hand upon the throne of Yah, milchama ladoshem ba'amalek midor dor. The Lord, or that's the four-letter name of God, Hashem, will be at war with Amalek midor dor, which is translated here as throughout the ages. It's also translated from generation to generation. Okay, but we're going to completely blow up the meaning of this, or he's going to blow up the meaning of this, okay? But again, so Moses' hands are held up. The Israelites triumph in this first battle as they come out of Egypt. And then we have this mysterious last line of chapter 17, hand upon the throne of the Lord, etc., which we'll now explore. Now remember that when the Torah talks about, when the Kabbalists talk about events in the Torah, which we read usually as historic events, right? The Israelites went to war with the people of Amalek and their king. The Kabbalists don't necessarily see that primarily as a historical event. Jikatilia sees this as a description of the movement of the essential cosmic forces of the universe, okay? And that's how he's going to explore it. He's not interested in like whether there was an actual, well, he might be interested, but whatever. For the purposes of our learning, he's not talking about this as like there's groups of human beings on the battlefield and Joshua's swinging a sword around and there's these awesome battle scenes and Joshua walks away and goes, yay. That's not what Jikatilia sees in this at all, right? He's talking about this is a reflection of the spiritual DNA of the universe and how it functions. That's how he's reading this. Okay, so hand upon the throne.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I don't get something. By mentioning, there's a paradox here. By mentioning the name Amalek and at the same time saying I will blot it out, you're ensuring its continuance in our memory, its immortality.
Yep.
It's in the Torah, and there it is.
Yeah, it's true. It's a paradox. I mean, you're totally right. It's a great point. It's a great question, and that's its own super important subtopic, which we can't talk about today. But you're absolutely right, Harvey. It's a great point. It's one of the most interesting puzzles in the Torah, is that very idea. So thank you for bringing that up, but I'm sorry that I can't explore it. Okay, now hand upon the throne of Yah. Now I got to point something out here. Oh, no, I did this later. Okay, so I want you to notice that when it says the throne of Yah, it's Kaf Samech. That's throne. Now, usually throne is spelled kiseh with an aleph at the end. Okay, the Torah doesn't explain why the aleph is gone, but usually the word throne is Kaf Samech Aleph. Here the aleph is gone. Okay? And I'm sharing that with you because he's going to talk about that. Hand upon the throne of Yah, Yud Hey Vav Hey will be at war with Amalek door to door from generation to generation. Okay. So who would like to read this first paragraph, which is going to baffle everyone? And we read this last time, but we're circling back. Will somebody read that?
What does door, generation to generation mean? Amalek the wicked comes from the power of the primordial snake, and it is there that he connects and draws his strength. And from the time that the snake spewed filth on Eve, Adam cut himself off from the upper source, and he was separated from his friend. This is the essence of how the Shekhinah was removed.
Okay, so we got to really far out places really quickly. Again, we touched on this very briefly last time. So Amalek is, remember, Amalek is now he's not a general, he's not a tribal chieftain who lived, 4,000 years ago or whatever. He is an expression of the primordial snake, that is the existence of wickedness in the world. And that's when we talk about Amalek, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking, so this is why, some people read this and they say, oh, it's really uncomfortable because it talks about the relationship between Israel and it vilifies non-Israelites, and that's not a good model for people who live in a heterogeneous society. Like, all of that is great and that's important, but you could tell they wouldn't even know what the hell you're talking about with that kind of thing, because it's like, we're talking about the root of evil in the universe. We're not talking about other people, okay? And from the time that snake spewed filth on Eve, this is a reference to a midrash, which is wild, which we're not going to talk about, but somehow Amalek was present there and was the thing that tempted Eve to separate herself, to help Adam and Eve to deceive God and thereby cut themselves off symbolically from God. Adam cut himself off from the upper source. Okay, so it's not exactly clear here, but Adam, it seems here, he's now using Adam as a way to talk about the human relationship to the divine and trying to seek out Shekhinah, God's manifest presence around us. So Amalek caused human beings way back in the day, Adam and Eve, to first lose the connection with God. They were the first ones to lose the connection with God because they cut themselves off, okay? And how did they cut themselves off? By embracing the snake, by allowing the snake, the kind of non-godly aspect of creation, to turn them away from God. So let's explore that for a minute. In what way, what the hell does this mean? Pardon my French. What does this mean? How did they embrace the snake? Well, think back to the story itself. What did they do in the story? What did Adam and Eve do in the story?
They ate from the tree of knowledge.
And why is that bad?
Well, because they were specifically told not to.
Right. And we could go to all kinds of cool places by exploring what does it mean, the tree of knowledge and human consciousness and all of that, which is totally worthwhile, but we're not going to, only because we've got limited time. But the core, just on the level of Peshat, God said essentially, here's how we're going to be together. And they made the decision that they didn't want to do that. Now, we could then also explore, well, what was it? She was offered a food, right? The symbol of bodily indulgence and pleasure. And she turned away from the purely spiritual world to satisfy her yearning in the material world. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is that rather than serving God's needs, she and Adam served their own ego needs, right? Going even deeper than just the material versus the spiritual. In answering the question, what shall I do? How shall I live? Rather than taking their instruction from God, they took their instruction from their own egos. What is it that I want, right? And then in that way, they then cut themselves off from God. That's what that means, okay? Let's go back to the text. Okay, even though so we have this this phrase that he has not really explained, and I'm still not 100% sure I understand it. But remember, going back to this verse from Exodus, after the battle with Amalek, God will be at war with Amalek door. And he's wants to explain that, but it's not 100% clear to me exactly how he's using door, although I have an idea. But in any event, for right now, I'm putting less emphasis on that than just the idea that Amalek is this force that lured people away from being with God to connecting to their own egos. Okay, somebody else want to read here? Even though Israel
stood at Mount Sinai, and the stain of her filth was removed, the blemish of the moon was never removed from the world.
Okay, which now,
Okay.
this is
Continue.
completely baffling. Yeah, no, hold on one second. So as we talked about last time, the moon is a symbol for Malchut. Okay. And the reason that the moon is a symbol for Malchut is because just as the moon does not generate any of its own light, it only reflects light, so too does the material world, the world down here, not generate any of its own divine light. It can only reflect the divine light. And so the moon is often used as a stand-in for Malchut. So the blemish of the moon, like the light coming off the moon, is never quite perfect. It's not fully radiant. It's always compromised a little bit.
At the time this was written, did they know that kind of astronomy where the moon is a rock and the sun it has the light?
Yes, it's a great question because I don't know when people figured that out, but yes, they seem to have known that because they explain the metaphor in the way that I just did. So I believe that they did, but it's a great question. Okay, let's keep going. Sarah, you want to keep reading here? When Amalek
came, he intensified the blemish of the moon when it's not full, and he struck the thigh of Jacob, which therefore caused the crumbling of the house of David's kingdom.
Okay, so pause there. So what he's just going back to the moon metaphor, we're not always in the middle of the month, right? We don't always have a full moon. It's blemished because sometimes we see the full light and sometimes we don't. Just like in our lives, sometimes we have this experience of like this divine harmony and perfection, and sometimes we just can't see it anywhere. Okay, so that's why it's blemished. The blemish is not in the divine light because God is constantly shining on us. It's a question of our varying ability to perceive the light. Okay, so he struck the thigh of Jacob. Now, we talked about this last time. Suddenly, Amalek and the Garden of Eden and Jacob are all being brought together. In the Torah, they're totally separate stories that have no relationship to each other, but in the Kabbalah, it's all part of the same grand cosmic story. So he struck the thigh of Jacob and therefore caused the crumbling of the house of David's kingdom. Okay, keep going.
So in Adam's time, when they were cut off from their source and Amalek struck the thigh of Jacob, it was ordained that we should read the verses in the Torah, which recall our suffering under Amalek in Parshat Zachor. Behold, the last two letters of the name were blemished, so to speak, by Amalek. The reason being that the hand of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh struck them, as it says, the hand of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh was upon you.
Okay, this is such a difficult paragraph. So let's take this bit by bit. Remember that we do read the passage about Amalek, which makes Harvey's point even more fascinating. Like, it's not just that the Torah says that, but it's that we're commanded to read Parshat Zachor, which tells us to forget Amalek. So when we read Parshat Zachor and we read about Amalek, we're not supposed to think, according to Chikatilia, we're not thinking about Israel, the actual physical non-Israelite nations that in the past.
Grass going for 2 years.
Hi. I'm not sure what that was, but can somebody mute themselves? Thanks. Amalek, Zachor, I forgot. Give me a second here. So when we read the Parsha of Amalek, we're not supposed to be thinking, according to Chikatilia, it would seem, we're not supposed to be thinking about the historical enemies who used to be mean to the Israelites. We're not even supposed to see them as a symbol of current people, current nations or people who don't like Jews. That's not what Amalek is about. Amalek is about the source of evil that steers us away from God. Okay, it may be an internal force within us, it may be a force in the world, but it steers us away from our connection with God. So what does he mean? The last two letters of the name were blemished. Just that phrase. Don't even try to read it with the clause that follows it. Anybody want to guess what this phrase means? Whoa, that's a crazy color. Let's go a little chiller. Anybody want to guess? Yeah.
If we're still thinking about the actual letters, then the meaning of the letters, then the non-spiritual parts, the
right.
earthly parts of the name were blemished.
Right, exactly, right. The parts that connect to creation, the created world, were somehow blemished, right, by Amalek. Amalek disrupted creation because he somehow, this force that guides human beings to steer away from God can disrupt creation. Human beings have the power to disrupt the balance of creation. That's what it means when the last two letters of the name were blemished. Okay, the reason being that the hand of Hashem struck them. Okay, this is where it gets really, really difficult. The reason being the hand of Hashem struck them, as it says, the hand of Yud-He Vav-He was upon you. Okay, maybe we'll come back to this, but I'm not sure even I understand exactly how he wants us to understand that.
Rabbi,
yes.
so we're saying that Amalek has this supernatural influence on the cosmos.
No, we're saying Amalek is the supernatural force within the cosmos. You have to let go of the idea that Amalek is a person. Amalek is a code name for the existence of non-godliness in the world.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's really hard to let go of our usual way of reading the Torah, where we see Amalek as a human being who was a bad guy. He's much worse than a bad guy, and he's not a human being, turns out. Okay. Okay, Vayavo Amalek, and if you don't understand, it's okay, because it's A, it's baffling, and B, because we haven't finished here. The sages taught, oh wait, sorry. Okay, Vayavo Amalek, so now if we go back to where we were, I'm trying to, so I read you the end part of the Amalek story, but if we go back to the beginning, where does this all happen? Vayavo Amalek vayelachem im Yisrael beRefidim. Amalek came and fought with Israel at Refidim. Refidim is a place name. At least that's what you think when you're reading the story. Okay? Where did all this stuff go down with Amalek? At Refidim. So now he's going to tell us what Refidim's about. Amalek came and fought with Israel in Refidim. Now, if you look at the word Refidim, you can see, well, I'll tell you what, we'll turn back to that in a moment. The sages taught, so in the Gemara, it's somewhere in the Talmud, it says that the name Refidim really is a shorthand for Refion Yadayim, a weak hand. Refion means like weakness, or like a weak grasp is what the word Refion means. And Yadayim, as you probably know, means hands. Okay? So and this is not Chikatilia's invention. The Talmud says that the name Refidim, which again is the place name where Amalek battled Israel, comes from this phrase meaning weak hands, okay, according to this crazy Talmudic interpretation. Therefore, we say that the first snake and Amalek together hit the last two letters, okay, which are Vav He. So exactly as Anne said, somehow this primal force of evil that pulls people away from God, they struck the last two letters. They distorted, they upset the harmony of creation by encouraging human beings to turn away from God. And Amalek, which are Vav He, and their hand had reached everything that was inside the name, except for the letters Yud and He. For they had no way of reaching the upper ministers. Just instead of ministers, I'm just going to say divine energy. They had no way of reaching the upper divine energy. For I'm going to say it resides above. Okay, so this is really just, he's spelling out exactly what Anne just said. Okay, go ahead, Anne.
Go back to the quote that we were looking at. It says the hand of Adonai struck them.
I know, right, and that was the part that I said I'm not really sure that I understand that. As I need to go back and read my notes about this. So I'm doing something that's not super intellectually responsible, which is that I'm just encouraging you to ignore that.
Excellent.
I mean, I
consider it done.
I say that with a little bit of self-consciousness because I feel like I ought to be able to explain it, but I can't at this point. I don't have the understanding to explain how he's using that. I have a notion it might be a very, very, very deep teaching about the fact that ultimately, remember that even Amalek was created by God, right? It's not like Amalek is this force that's not under God's control. Like ultimately, God creates the possibility of evil in the world, right? And this is something we have not really talked about that much in our class. And in Lurianic Kabbalah gets talked about a lot, which is the fact that there is no force in existence that was not created by God. So even the possibility of human beings being tempted to turn away from God, that was created by God as well.
Yeah, it's always bothered me that God says, I will blot out the name of Amalek forever. It's like, well, Amalek is yours to begin with.
Right. Yes, and I guess a weak read of an answer, to use a Talmudic analogy, a weak read of an answer to that is that Amalek is part of the aspect of free choice, of free will, right? So in order to create human beings, God had to create the possibility of Amalek, right? Of something, of a non-holy space within which human beings can reside. So that's what this blocked out phrase might mean, but I'm not sure. By the way, if you ever want to tell somebody a great story about like the worst classes you've ever been in, you can actually say, I was in this class where literally the rabbi didn't understand this passage he was teaching us, and he literally blacked it out so we couldn't see it. Okay, so that's...
Okay, can we for a second look at the name? Melech, doesn't that mean king? And Amelech, that would be the negation of royalty, the negation of kingdom?
I like it, but that's not how you spell Melech. That's I like it though. I like your creative impulse. Okay, so so thus it is written, Ki Yad. So now we're finally back to the verse that we started with, which is down here. Okay, at the end of the Amalek battle. Remember, Moses builds this altar, and then he says this thing. Ki Yad al Kes Ya. Milchama la Hashem Amalek midor dor. For the hand is on the, and remember he talked about Amalek's hand. The hand is on the throne, and remember it's missing the letter Aleph. There's the word throne. Whoops. There's the word throne. It's missing Aleph. They blemished the Kisei, the throne of Yah, and Kaf Samech is what remained. So the fact that the Torah has, one way to look at this is you might look at this as a teaching that's setting out to explain why the word throne is not properly spelled in the book of Exodus here. And his explanation is because it reflects the fact that there was a blemish on the throne of God, but it didn't actually destroy the throne of God. A blemish because he helped distort the harmony of creation, Amalek did, but he does not ultimately defeat God, because God remains as Yah, this unassailable reality that can never be diminished. Okay? Let me pause there because we've just bitten off a huge amount. Questions, comments? All right. I've successfully just narcoticized everyone, either through the heaviness of the teaching or my droning, incomprehensible teachings.
You've just blown all our minds.
I'm going with that. I'm going with that.
Yeah, me
okay.
Too.
Rabbi,
okay.
I do have a,
I'm sorry, your signal's getting all, Myra, I can't.
Why.
Myra, sorry, I'm muting you.
Oh,
I'm muting you because your signal is too weak and I can't understand what you're saying. Maybe if you can move closer to your Wi-Fi or something and then try again. Sorry, we couldn't understand you.
Can you hear me now? I'm on a little tiny cell phone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can, a little better, yep.
I've noticed that in one sentence it was a Yud Hey, and then almost immediately afterwards it was Yud Hey Vav Hey. Why the transition?
Great question. See, now these are like, that's a Kabbalist level question. Now you're asking questions like a Makubal. Like that's a great question. So you're saying, right, you're saying if we're talking about this verse as an expression of Yah, right, that dimension of God, the unceasing dimension of God, or the supernal level, which is even above creation, why does it say, why does it have the actual name of God here that includes reference to the created world? It's a great question. So elsewhere, he actually explains that. But I think, I was going to say something ridiculous. I was going to say, I think what Jukatilia would say, and that would be a totally absurd claim. So my understanding would be that that there are two things going on here. One is an acknowledgement that Amalek no evil can ever touch the source of divine light, can never prevent it from functioning fully. And not only that, the world, the full world that God created, the created world itself, is set up as a I guess as a battle. This is not how I usually view the world, but a battle in which ultimately God will prevail over Amalek. The created world itself is built to defeat Amalek. That is the full name of God, because God has planted within us the capability to eradicate evil by clinging to God. And therefore, the four-letter name of God is battling Amalek. I think Myra just disappeared. Okay. So we're going to go to another passage now. Okay, the one who understands this will understand the essence of the chapter of Amalek. And sorry, so we skipped forward a few pages here. So again, just hit the reset button in your mind. He's building on himself as he goes through the chapter, but this is not continuous with what we just read. The one who understands this will understand the essence of the chapter of Amalek and the chapter of Ma'avar Yavok, because everything is contained in these places. Ma'avar Yavok, anybody know what that's a reference to? Ma'avar Yavok is the crossing of the Yavok River, where Jacob, who represents Tiferet, crosses and has the wrestling with the angel. The Ma'avar means the crossing of the river, and Yavok is the name of the river. And by the way, the word Yavok has the same letters as the name Yaakov, but that's a totally different thing. Okay, so let me explain this to you, he says. Now, and then he somewhat randomly starts with a passage from Psalms. Psalm 118:10 says, God says, all the nations encompass me. Okay, in the Psalm, all the nations encompass me. Okay, here the ministers, and we might say the angels of the nations have a place to latch onto. Just that shouldn't make any sense to you yet, and if it doesn't, that's okay. Let's keep going. Well, actually, will somebody else pick up and read this so you don't have to just hear me talking all the time?
Here the ministers or angels of the nations have a place to latch onto. This is the essence for the letter
Vav.
The
letter Vav, sorry.
Of the name, which contains 6 Sephiroth. For the essence of the letter Vav in the Torah is actually called Yud-He Vav-He throughout the Torah. And this is referred to in the Torah service. For you, Yud-He Vav-He is the Gedula, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, and the Hod. Okay,
pause there because we've got to totally unpack this baffling phrase. Okay, so this part you actually know. Lecha Adonai hagedula v'hagevura v'hatiferet v'hanetzach v'hahod. Okay, which we always say during the Torah service, and we don't think about it, but for the Kabbalists, this is a really, really important phrase.
Are we saying it because it's the names of this Sephiroth, or do those names mean something else? Is that a Kabbalistic prayer?
Well, my answer to that would be it depends who you ask. I mean, I'm not trying to be coy, but like, you know, if you read somebody who does, if you're studying somebody who doesn't study Kabbalah, and they'll say, no, it just means that God has the greatness and the power and the glory. But the Kabbalists would say, what are you, bananas? Of course it's referring to the Sephiroth. So, but if the question is, does this emerge from the pen of somebody who we identify as a Kabbalist, the simple answer most people would understand it is no. It's not. Doesn't come from the Sefer Yetzirah. It doesn't come from one of the later works of Kabbalah. This is part of the ancient liturgy. And actually, this line I think is from the Torah itself. That's quoted in the liturgy. Okay. So now let's go back to this very, very difficult little section. Okay. The ministers of the nations have a place to latch on to. Now remember, we don't fully know what he means. We don't fully know what he means by this, but we can form a guess, because remember that he talked about the fact that nobody can do damage to Yud-He. No one can do damage to Yud-He. Yud-He is just this constant, perfect, beaming radiance of divine light. The question is just whether there's something to receive it. The nations, that is the forces and here the nations are not historical nations or peoples. He means them as forces within the world that can lure people away from connecting to God. The nations can do damage to the harmony of the created world. They can make the Vav-He turn away from the Yud-He. So they have a place to latch onto, okay? Whoopsie, where'd I go? Oh, there we go. So that's what he means, I believe. This is the essence of the letter Vav of the name, which contains 6 Sephiroth. For the essence of the letter Vav in the Torah is actually called Yud-He Vav-He, okay? And that is true. The Tiferet, the name of Tiferet, of the center And here, let me go back to our little drawing because I want you to not completely lose your minds here, and I want you to have something to hold on to. Where'd my little drawing go? One second. Oh, there it is. Bear with me. Thank you for your patience. I need like 10 screens to teach this class. One moment. Okay. Tiferet, the centerpiece of creation, right, which balances all the different divine forces in order to allow creation to sustain unless something acts against it, is represented by the letter Vav. And yeah, and so that's what he's referring to there. Okay. All right, let's go back to our very difficult text. And I'll pause for questions in a moment, because if you don't have questions, I know that we're just going to end the class, because that means that you're not able to even hear me anymore, because I've gone terribly wrong. So you better have some questions. So, oops. Okay. So, and that Vav is referred to, Tiferet is referred to as Yud He Vav He. That's the name of that Sphira. So it's, and this is a little puzzling, because Yud He Vav He also includes Yud and He, obviously. It includes the three upper Sphirot, which are above Tiferet. But Yud He Vav He is the name that we give to Tiferet, because Tiferet somehow balances the energy of the upper Sphirot along with all of the Sphirot of creation. Okay, so that's what he means when he says the essence of the letter Vav in the Torah is actually called Yud He Vav He throughout the Torah. And it is referred to in the Torah service. For you, Hashem, is the Gedula, the Gevura, the Tiferet, the Netzach, and the Hod. So now let's look at that again. Whoops, one moment. Let's look at our Sphira again. Lacha Adonai Hagadula. Gedula is Chesed. Hagavura is there. Tiferet, Netzach, Vehahod. Right? It's exactly what our verse says is exactly what is depicted in the Sphirot. And so when we say Lecha Adonai, you, Adonai, the four-letter name of God represents Tiferet, are the Gedula, and you're the Gevura, and you're the Netzach, and you're the Hod. That little passage, every time we open the Torah for the Torah service, is encapsulated right there. And that's what we're talking about. So the next time you sing that passage, God willing, it should be soon in a time near to us where we can gather in shul and have a full Torah service again. We actually have not sung this phrase together since early March or whenever it was that we stopped gathering. But next time we do this, you can realize that we're not just throwing these adjectives about God around. We're talking about God, you are the one who balances all of these forces in the created world that allows your divine light to come down and to bring harmony. That's what we're saying. And even more awesome, and then I'll stop for questions, is that just as every name of God is associated with a sphira, every sphira is associated with different things in the world and different people. The sphere of Tiferet is represented by Torah. Torah is another code name for Tiferet. And so when we hold the Torah and we're singing Lecha Adonai Hagadula V'Hagivura, it has multiple layers of meaning because the Torah itself is an expression of Tiferet. Okay, let me pause there and take questions. Yes. Hold on, Cheryl, who's not spoken yet, and then Harvey.
Okay. So if we go back to your chart of numbers earlier on,
yeah.
The Vav maps on to let's see, so it maps onto 6
Yep.
of the Sephiroth.
Right, which
So
again works. Remember that works out nicely. That works out nicely because you have Tiferet, Gedula, Gevura, Netzach, and Hod and Tiferet. It is 6.
Yeah, so it seems to me when he's talking about the Vav, he's talking about Tiferet, he's talking about all the lower Sephiroth, and there was something he said a while ago about Tiferet, sort of is you can refer to all the Sephiroth by the lower Sephiroth by Tiferet because it's connected.
Well, right, kind of, sort of.
Balance point.
Sort of. What he says that the name Yud He Vav He is a name that refers to Tiferet, and so there's this sort of confusing bit where, on the one hand, he's saying Yud He refers to the upper 3 Sephiroth, but then he's also saying Yud He Vav He refers to Tiferet, which is below the upper 3. But remember that Tiferet stands in the middle, and it kind of brings everything into harmony. So usually, go ahead.
Oh, so what's floating around vaguely in my mind is that the Yud He is the upper Sephiroth.
Hold on 1 second. Someone's speaking here. I can't hear you, Cheryl.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the Yud He is the 3 uppermost Sephiroth, and that's sort of the closest or the purest light of God.
Yep.
And seems like all are, sort of hitting that, all the metaphor of sort of violence or struggle against that.
Yep.
Sort of adds the Vav He to the Yud He. It's kind of, that's the place where the light is less pure or more distant or something.
Right.
So it's the 4-letter name seems to me it's like actually, a more mundane or worldly name than just the Yud He.
That's right. I mean, yeah, and I think that's a good way to say it. Now, the Kabbalists would quibble with you because they would say, well, it's not mundane because we're talking about like the perfect harmony of the universe. But yes, the way to say it is the Vav He includes the physical universe, whereas Yud He only includes this upper potentiality for the creation of the universe. Now, so yes, you said something very valuable, and I want to push back a little bit as a way to draw something out. So on the one hand, Yud He, you might say, is at a higher level because it's pure divine light that is not, it cannot be exposed to any imperfection. When it's put together with Vav He, you have then the universe as God created it. But the reason that Yud He Vav He is actually higher, we can also say it's actually a better form than Yud He, is because Yud He Vav He includes the universe as God wants it to be. For some reason that we can't really know, God wanted there to be something in the world besides just God. And God created the world in order to allow created beings to recreate divine perfection. So even though the fact that Yud He Vav He in a sense is lower because it includes something that is not pure divine reality, it's also the creation of the physical world is the first step on God creating the perfection that God actually wants. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Michael Sasnow, among others, has his hand up. Harvey.
Yeah. You've provided us with a great intellectual underpinning of Kabbalah. But doesn't Kabbalah also include a shortening of the way, a way for us to spiritually reach God in some non-intellectual way?
Yeah, that's a really, really profound question. It's really good. I mean, look, here I'm just going to speak. Let me first speak kind of like as the academically, and then I'll speak, as just a person. So I think that if you want to study medieval Kabbalah, because we're looking at a 13th century text, I don't know that he would be able to answer your question on the terms in which you asked it, because he would say you cannot understand the Kabbalah without doing what we're doing, right? This is it. This is the deal. Like, you want to know the truth, here's the truth. This is the decoder ring for reading the Torah. And the Torah, only if you have the decoder ring, can you then understand what the Torah is saying about the nature of reality. But so then, now let me take off my academic hat, and then it's not academic, but it's like the text true hat. So then say, what do we then do with that? So that's where we get into Kabbalistic practices, which this class is not really about, for better or for worse. But yes, Kabbalists meditated, and they used their Torah study and their prayer for meditation. And that's very clear from a number of texts, including parts of this one, that simply studying Kabbalah itself is for sure the foundation, and it's 90% of the riches. But if you want to really cleave to God, which becomes ultimately the aim of the later Kabbalists and the Hasidim, you must engage in meditation and prayer, which are supra-rational, because that's part of the created reality, right? Rationality is a lower creation, in a sense.
So then when do we go to applied Kabbalah?
Well, I mean, just, to state it simply and not very interestingly, this class is not about that, I guess. I mean, I would say down the road, I might teach a class, and I mean, I would do so with caution because I'm not a maven, but, there are, maybe there's a place for classes about meditation. I will say I'm doing a pretty deep dive on and let me just answer this briefly and then we'll get back to it. There's a text by Moshe Cordovero by the Ramak, who precedes. He comes after the text we're reading. He precedes Isaac Luria, but he comes after this text by a couple centuries, and he has a book called Tefillah LaMoshe, the prayer of Moses, because his name was Moshe Cordovero, and he applies Kabbalistic concepts to prayer. He goes through the prayer book and he gives a layer of meaning to the prayers through the lens of Kabbalah, and those are very good to have as potentials for kavanot and meditation in prayer. But that's, I think the first step is understanding the framework, and then we can talk about the application of it. Otherwise, the risk of doing it, and I know that's less interesting than just saying, well, let's sit down and just cleave to God. I have nothing against anyone who wants to sit down and meditate, but if you want to meditate Kabbalistically, if you want to do Jewish meditation, I'm not willing to say that, oh, it's all the same. You can go to the dude down the street who's teaching Vipassana meditation or whatever, it's all the same. So therefore, one has to begin with the framework of understanding. And a lot of people don't dig that, and I completely get it. If somebody doesn't dig it, they don't want to jump through all the hoops and they just want to, just meditate. That's fine, but you're not doing Kabbalistic meditation if you do that, which is also fine, but it's just not the thing. Okay.
Why are they mutually exclusive? Those two concepts. It doesn't seem to me like they should be.
Maybe they shouldn't be, but they are, because I think this is a separate topic, which I'm not cutting it off because it's a bad topic to discuss, but I want to honor the people who came here just to talk about this chapter. I guess my short answer is, if they were the same thing, if they were intended to be the same thing by the Kabbalists, then the Kabbalists wouldn't have given us all of this knowledge.
Indeed.
Right? then it would just be like, okay, yeah, you're right. It would be a lot simpler just to do breathing meditation and just do Vipassana. And by the way, I'm not dissing. I mean, I've done a 10-day Vipassana retreat. I have nothing against it at all. I'm not dissing it, but I'm just saying we got to be honest to our traditions and our Kabbalists perceived. The people who are teaching the text we're looking at, they believed that there was a particular road into meditation that was the Kabbalistic path into meditation. But Brad, your question is a great one and a fuller answer it deserves, but I'm not going to do it at this moment. Okay.
Just one more second.
Yeah.
So what they're saying then is that they're suggesting that you really should travel through the mud of these physical realities, these exercises, first to get to the upper plane of meditation and prayer? Or am I misunderstanding that?
No, I don't think they would. I don't think they would put it like that. I mean, first of all, they would see what we're doing now as a form of meditation. Like you can study once. Well, no, sorry. Let me say this. Let me say it like this. I think what they might say is, look, this book is a tool book, right? Let's say you want to build a tower to God. You go out without the toolkit, you're just going to be standing and looking up at the heavens. But we're giving you the toolkit, and then you take that toolkit, and through further learning, and I guess maybe also meditation, you then build it. But I don't think, I mean, they saw this, what we're doing now, they would have seen as some of the most rarefied activity that a human being can engage in. So I wouldn't say it's like the mud that you have to slog through, right? They saw this as like some of the most precious human activity is doing the learning we're doing now.
Well, you just answered my question and what I want, and was what I wanted to hear. So
okay, all right. So okay. So then let's keep going back to this. The essence of the letter of the Torah. Okay. Okay. The sphere of Yesod is contained in the thorn of the letter Vav. This is a super cool idea, but we're not going to talk about it today, just because I want to keep us on track here. Okay, it is, in fact, I'm going to erase this just for the time being because it's a different thing. It is in this situation that the verse, all the nations encompass me, is speaking. For surrounding the letter Vav of the name, that is surrounding Tiferet, all the ministers of the nations encompass it. Okay, so the non-divine forces of the world, we're not talking about actual nations, we're talking about the non-divine forces of the world, can grasp onto different aspects of the created world, whether it's kindness or whether it's judgment. Anything can be used to take one away from God. Above the letter Vav, they cannot ascend, for this is the essence of Yah, to which they have no entry. Nothing that exists as part of the created world can ascend above Tiferet. Nothing can assail Yah. Okay? It's unassailable. And this is when it says all the nations encompass me, they encompass Tiferet. Everything, once we're in the created world, there's the risk of something that can pull us away from the divine. But we can always have hope, knowing that no matter how bad the world gets, Yah is always breathing divine possibility back into the world. It's unceasing. It's always there. The world of Vav-He may get corrupted and off balance by people or by forces that want to unbalance it, but Yah will never get damaged. It always remains pristine and perfect, breathing its divine light into the universe, so to speak, constantly. Okay, a little bit more. Know that this sphera, okay, so now he's giving us a different name for the sphera of Chokhmah. This sphera is referred to in the Torah as Yesh. Now the word Yesh means being, or it means there is, okay? If I'm going to say, if I were to, like, I'm looking out my window right now and I see a guy standing on the street. Yesh ish barachov. There is a man in the street. Yesh just means that. And he's saying Yesh is the name for Chokhmah. Okay, it's one of the names. Yah Chokhmah and Yesh are all interchangeable. And you must realize the reason. For the first Sphira, what's the first Sphira in his telling? What's at the very top?
Keter.
Keter, right. Keter is the very top. Keter, the first Sphira is Keter, which is hidden from all living things, and no one may even contemplate it. And for it is called Ayin. Ayin. It's called Ayin, excuse me. It's called Ayin. It's also called Ayin, but that's a different thing. It's called Ayin, right? So remember, Ein Sof, which means infinite or without end. Ein Sof was the God that we don't know anything about. We just know that before the universe was created, God was Ein Sof. There was just unity, infinity. That's all we can say about it. Once God began to create the universe, the first energy that was primally at the heart of the notion that there would be a world is called Keter. It's almost indistinguishable from God's infinite reality, but it's like one tiny step removed. We can't say anything even about Keter. And so it's one of the names for Keter is Ein. And he then says, why is it called Ein? If one comes to ask of it something, the answer will be Ein. Meaning, Rabbi Rose, tell me something about Keter. What do we know about Keter? How does it function in the world? The answer is Ein. We don't know anything. We can't say anything about it. Meaning there is no one who can contemplate the essence of its depth and grandeur. Thus, it is not symbolized by a specific letter, but only by the crown on the letter Yud. So remember I said that the first two letters capture the three upper Sphirot. The crown of the Yud, the very tippy point of the letter Yud, represents Keter. The body of the Yud represents Chokhmah. The first Hey represents Bina. Okay? So that's why he's saying it is not symbolized by a specific letter, but only by the crown on the letter Yud. So this is actually, I think, so brilliant, because what he's saying, he's actually saying something very powerful about the nature of language. Or he's drawing out I should say, this is a better way to say it. He's drawing out the meaning of the sometimes apparent, seemingly ridiculous idea that Keter is represented by the crown of the Yud. So when I first heard that, I was like, yeah, okay, great. If you're really trying to jam all 10 Sphirot into the 4-letter name of God, then great. You just say that the crown of Keter is the crown of the Yud is Keter. Like it just seems silly to me. But what he's saying here is very profound. Keter is beyond comprehension. It is beyond language. And therefore, it doesn't have a letter that represents it. It only has this little thing that points to the heavens, this little like scratch that's not a full letter. Because if it were a letter, it would then be in the realm of human discourse and contemplation. But Keter is beyond language. And so we can't say anything about it. We can only say Ein. We can only say nothing. It is the origin of thought, Keter is, which flows. Okay, the origin of divine thought. Now here too, we have to put thought in quotation marks. We have thought, and when we talk about God's plan for the universe, we're making an analogy to our thinking. Like that seems like a reasonable way for us to talk about it, but it's not real thought in the way that we understand it. But Keter is the origin of thought. It's not thought, it's the origin of thought which flows. For the beginning of where the order of the Sphirot is perceivable, okay, where do the Sphirot become perceivable in a way that we can begin to even talk about them? It originates with the second Sphira, which is Chokhmah. Don't worry, I'm going to go back over this, and maybe we'll end with questions about this section. And this is the place where one has access to request one's wishes, meaning through prayer, right? So we don't know, Chokhmah is sort of like the sphere of Yah, of Chokhmah, of Yesh, is mostly concealed from us, but we know that somehow we say that it contains the kind of fundamental intellectual, conceptual framework of what would be creation. And therefore, at least we can say that about it. And we can talk about God's wisdom, but we can't talk about anything above that. Even though it is not revealed, right, it's still concealed from us. It is not completely hidden, as is the first sphera. The second sphera, which has limited accessibility for requests through the everflow emanating from Keter, is called Yesh. Keter is beyond creation. We can't say anything about it because we exist in creation. All the things we might say about it would be drawn from our experience in the created world. But nothing down here can give us any sense of what Keter, of what God's almost purest essence is. But when we talk about Chokhmah, now we're at least beginning to talk about something that we can address and conceptualize. And therefore it is called Yesh, because Yesh means being, or it means is, or there is. Okay? I'm going to pause there, understanding that you probably don't understand what we just read, but maybe we can get there by questions and answers. So we'll spend the last 5, 6, 7 minutes on questions about what I just said. Raise your hand if you think you could possibly explain that to somebody. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you explain it. Cheryl, you kind of get it, or you have a question?
I don't know which it is. When I hear the Ain and the Yesh, it makes me think of the Tanya, which is the kind of basic tests of Chabad, and the big miracle that's always being talked about is Yesh Me'ayin.
Right.
Something from nothing. And it seems like this is almost like an illustration of that, you know,
absolutely.
We have the Yesh, and in this diagram, it's flowing from Ayin.
Yep. No, I think that's, Yesh Me'ayin is sometimes used to talk about something that's slightly different from that, but I think that does work here. Yesh, being, Chokhmah, Me'ayin, from Keter, something that is nothing. Why is it nothing? Because it's not yet in any form that's recognizable to us. It's nothing. There's no thing. You can't name it, touch it, feel it, describe it, conceptualize it. It is not a thing. It's there because the world exists, and therefore Keter, which is we associate with the origins of divine creation. It's in that sense it's there, but it's nothing. And so when we talk about Yesh, if you want to look at Chokhmah for a moment as like the conceptual framework for the created world before it becomes into form, that's Yesh. Yesh comes from Ayin, from nothing. So yeah, that's very nice. Yes, Joel.
So is that, am I on mute? Okay,
no.
So Keter, because maybe it's later on, and maybe you covered this and I just missed it, but in the 10 Sephiroth, sometimes Keter is not included because it's either, because we don't know how to explain it, it's so high up, it's either the top one and then the other 9, Chachma, Bina. So those 3 represent the spiritual, if I understand it, in the bottom. But then you lose Da'at, which is, I guess, like our version of the earthly version of intelligence or understanding.
Right.
So
Joel is referring to the fact that, and Joel, thank you. It's a great question. And by the way, I don't have the ability to answer it, but I just want to explain to people what you're referring to. So sometimes, especially in Chabad Hasidism, the 10 Sefirot are talked about without Keter, and in place of Keter, you have Da'at. So in the Sephirotic tree actually looks different in some renderings. And Da'at is often translated as consciousness, as it harmonizes Chokhmah, which is the potentiality for a concept, and Bina, which is the articulation of that concept. And when those two come together, you have Da'at, which is like an ability to describe or understand something that's informed by an appreciation of the ultimate source of a thing. So having said that, I don't fully understand Da'at's place in the Kabbalah, mostly because the Kabbalah that I've studied comes before Da'at was put in as one of the ways of talking about the 10 Sefirot. So I know that's not a satisfying answer, but that's my honest answer.
But it's just that Keter is either because we can't explain it. I guess maybe that's how they decided to. It's still there, but it's just over everything because it's just so unexplainable. It's just so
that's right
infinite.
You can't say anything about it. Right.
So it's just there, and everything else falls below, and maybe one day we'll get to that level.
Well, so I like what you just said, because so according to the Kabbalists, we will not one day get to that level, not in the form that we're in, because it's I'm glad you said this. Our inability to access Keter is not a bug, it's a feature. It's not because we haven't studied enough, or we're not pure enough, or we haven't meditated enough. It is literally beyond the potential grasp of even the highest level of even the greatest prophet. Nobody who is alive can experience Keter. So it's
in the afterlife.
Right. Maybe ultimately when all things are rectified in the period that we call Mashiach, and there's total oneness and unity, then yes, but then we won't be recognizable to ourselves in this form. At least I don't think so.
Yeah, in the infinite, there's no differentiation whatsoever, and we live in the world of differentiation. Right. I mean, that was the first thing. If you look at the story of Adam and Eve, what did the first thing they do pretty much was differentiate themselves.
Right. They separated themselves. Yeah. So then I'm just going to draw us to a close, and that we can spend more time on this next time. So if you haven't quite grasped this last part, I didn't do a great job explaining it because I was kind of rushing, and B, it's just very difficult stuff. So we can pick up here next time. But what I want to do is just close with this beautiful reframing of this passage about Jacob from the Torah, because now I'll show you now how a Kabbalist reads the Torah. I mean, you already have a sense of this, but just to give you another example. So remember that Jacob has the dream of the ladder. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder stood on the ground whose top reached the heavens, and he beheld Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, stood above, this is supposed to be behold. My bad. Behold, Yud-Heh Vav-Heh stood above him. It's actually alav in the Torah, over him, or sometimes it's rendered as next to him. And Yaakov awakened from his sleep, saying, Achen, or I've translated this word as behold, but sometimes it's translated in a different way. Yesh Yud-Heh Vav-Heh in this place, which is usually translated as God is in this place. Remember I said yesh means there is or is. Usually this is translated as God is in this place, v'anochi lo yadati, and I did not know. Anochi, I, lo, did not, yadati, I did not know. But he's just said, listen, yesh doesn't mean yesh. Sometimes a yesh is not just a yesh, to misquote Freud. Sometimes yesh is chokhmah. And according to him, Jacob had this what's the word I'm looking for? This intimation in this moment, which was not just him sleeping by the river, but this is like this deep meditative prayer experience where he had this almost like brushed up against, it sounds like, the awareness, this very, very high level of reality, this high, he brushed up against the sense that there is this, underneath everything is this plan, this togetherness, this harmony, this perfect, pure existence that's underlying all of our apparently fragmented world that is called Yesh. And so he didn't say, there is God in this place. He said, Yesh Hashem. He was saying, Chokhmah is like, I don't know how Jikatili might translate this. Chokhmah is within Tiferet. Chokhmah is within the harmonic world, the world that we see around us in this place. And I, lo yadati, I did not have awareness of this. And Joel, what I didn't say in my earlier answer to you is that actually your question was very prescient, because in this chapter, he actually does refer to da'at, because the word yadati comes from the word da'at, which is right there in the root, as you can see. And I'm not 100% sure of how he's using it. It's certainly different than how it's talked about in Chabad, but there's something about da'at there. But anyway, so it appears that Jacob wakes up and has this heavy realization and says, wow, God is here. But actually, Jacob represents Tiferet, first of all. Jacob is not Jacob. Jacob is the representation of Tiferet. Tiferet brings Chokhmah's conceptual framework into the existence of the world. But if we want to see Jacob as a person, which I think is a more appealing way to read this verse, I would say we can see Jacob as this being who suddenly had this awareness that there was even a higher level of reality than even the harmonized, perfect created world. There was something underlying it that was giving it life. And that's why he says yesh. He names it yesh. Okay, I don't expect that you fully grasp this, but I hope that I've given you at least little sparks of intriguing things that we might delve into deeper next time. And I'm going to stop, see if there are any closing questions, and then we'll continue next time. All right, everybody needs to do some spiritual calisthenics right now, because everyone's just like, you got to put the pieces together. By the way, I would recommend, this is what I do after I study a Kabbalistic text that I don't understand. I will sit down and write about it. And through writing about it, either I realize that I understood more than I thought, or it's helpful to me to be able to articulate precisely what I don't understand. Like Rabbi Rose was talking about this thing and that made sense. And then when we got to this part, I was had no idea what he was talking about. Even that can be very useful. So the state of mind you're in right now is very pregnant with possibilities, and maybe do some, try to articulate what you did or did not understand. All right, everybody, have a beautiful day.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.